Okay, this is the first time I'm doing this, so this is completely experimental. Uh, I'm just going to talk about uh, one tiny set of aspects of the Nautch girl, the devadasi, that was current at the time that she was being persecuted by the anti-nautch movement. I'm going to take off my glasses because they just shine back at me, and I'm going to look at firstly the aspect that was being um, directly persecuted, coming directly under the spotlight of the moralist opportunism of the period. And that was, of course, the perceived persona of the Nautch girl as a public woman or prostitute. Now, here we have a terrible array in disarray of many types of person and many types of institution, all bent on destroying this dual being, the Nautch girl, who on the one hand is perceived as the victim of a society that is less careful, far less careful about women's rights than Western society, and that has a whole array of issues relating to women that, in the Western viewpoint, need to be adjusted, brought into the modern world. The modern view at that time between 1890 and 1910, say, just to take a convenient double decade in the history, the modern view at that time being that women stood in need of being recognized more and more as human beings that were equal to men and should enjoy the same private and public rights. Now, in this modernizing situation, the Nautch girl is seen both as the victim of male lewdness, but also somehow as the perpetrator, the one who lures men to their ruin. And we see, not only from the writings of the Nautch movement of the time, but also from judicial findings and from the general social justice moralist point of view, that she is seen as an exploited woman. She's exploited from very early on, from the time of her childhood, from the time that she is either born into the tradition or adopted into the tradition, or sold, bought and sold into the tradition. And this is a completely untenable situation in the eyes of the variety of moralizing social justice reformist institutions of the time. And they're going to do their damnedest to change this situation. They internationalize it, they criminalize it, they hold the Nautch girl up as um, a sign of admonishment to the world at large, to the Raj, to the Indian public. She becomes the problem par excellence that is afflicting women in India. In this aspect of herself, this aspect of her public and private persona, which is her sexual aspect. But in approaching her in this way for destructive purposes, I mean destructive in the sense that they're out to destroy her, I mean, they're out to save the world. They're out to save the moral domain. They're out to improve the lot of women, but she has to be destroyed in the process. And looking only at this aspect of her, we might say that given the time, given what they perceived about her, given what they knew and did not know, they might have been to some extent justified in their doings and in their activism, although never in their fanaticism, which is another thing altogether. However, in looking at this aspect of her being, her lifestyle, her vocation, they were not overly concerned with the rest of her. That is, with her profession as a ritual specialist and also as an artist, a performing artist who was responsible for carrying forward the tradition of a very high kind of performing art in India and indeed in the world. They did not take into account, for example, that the ritual aspect, the auspiciousness, the relation to temple life, to the life of public religion, popular religion, was central and important to the whole way in which the discharge of that religious practice was seen in India at the time. Her ritual aspect was not understood. I mean, it's described in numerous writings from the time. They understood that she did kumbharati, that she tied thalis at weddings, that she danced at wedding processions, at temple processions, that she was present in the temple to dance and sing before the divinity, and so on. They had, to some extent, an understanding at the level of descriptiveness, but they had no insight into the meaning of her auspiciousness for the real practice, the real temple practice, that without her could no longer have the same kind of validity that it had always had. And through refusing really to investigate closely what her meaning was in this regard, they simply wrote it off as a ritual practice that was tied to and somehow flowed from her character as an immoral woman. Immoral woman in the sense that she was willing to countenance and take her ritual part in a religious practice that was conceived as itself essentially immoral. Some writers describe it as a survival of phallic religions, but all writers who consider it to some degree see it as a kind of debased form of religion, a religion that tolerates the very real and very imminent dynamic of sexuality. This disturbed the commentators deeply. So her ritual practice was also seen as part of a debased, sexualized religious view, and therefore tied back to the kind of personality, the prostitute personality, that they perceived her to need to be in order to carry out these ritual tasks. So these two aspects were linked back to uh, their concepts, the reformist concepts, the moralist, the purist concepts of illicit, inappropriate, and primitive admissions of sexuality at the heart of religious life. Her ritual vocation became, in their minds, an extension of her uh, immoral person. Only that kind of woman would take part in that kind of ritual. And then, thirdly, when we come to her art, the art that had been so wonderfully uh, expanded, extended, given more depth, and codified, formalized, and turned really into what perhaps illegitimately we might think of as a classical art. I don't know what other word would do. Her art was also not seen as a separate aspect of her vocation. Instead, again, the art becomes an extension of her immoral personality. She dances to lewd songs. The Sringara element is viewed as the kind of immoral theatrical performance that one might view in the music halls of Paris or London, especially by more fanatical reformers. And we shouldn't think that anyone among the reformers, either locally in India or among the missionaries or other social justice institutions and individuals, we shouldn't think that the art was for a moment of any real importance to them. They never said to themselves, let's try to save the art. It's not even that they did not take it into consideration. The fact of the matter is that they were quite happy to see the art perish together with the ritual and together with the perceived lascivious lifestyle of the devadasi or the nautch girl. So they were quite happy to kill this highly developed and complex and deeply humanizing art form, an art form that brings the realm of the so-called divine into the realm of what is human, what is understandable at the level of the gut, at the level that is of our lived human experience, in terms of what uh, uh, balanced notion of love and of passion means. I mean, balanced in the deepest sense. Uh, they were quite happy to see this art perish together with the ritual aspect, and together with the lifestyle aspect of the devadasi, which they perceive to be rotten to the core. Now, this was the point at which they had arrived by 1910. They were at the stage where she really just needed still to be handed over to some kind of authoritative body that would stop complaining, or merely complaining and merely moralizing, and actually get on with the job of finishing off the Nautch girl as a free, educated artist, as the type really of the more liberated woman of her time, educated, liberated, free thinking to an extent. They would do away with that together with the ritual and the art by all and any means possible, but they realized that they could not do it by shouting her down alone, by boycotting her, by making it impossible for her to earn a living, making it impossible for her to exist, because the tradition continued in spite of those efforts, although it continued thinly, meagerly, much diminished and aggrieved and hurt and wounded. It continued until the point where it could finally be put an end to by means of legislation that made it impossible for the system to continue in any form whatsoever. Because we should remember that the one thing these moralists of the day did not contemplate was the question of whether the devadasi system could renew itself from within, could, by means of piecemeal steps, some kind of internal regulation with help from external bodies, could update itself and find some kind of place in the modern world in a revised form. They didn't contemplate this. They just wanted to see it killed, dead, finished. As most reformers trying to reform anything do. So by 1910, she was mortally wounded. Her ritual craft was in complete disrepute. Her art was utterly disregarded, and she was really only waiting for the hangman appointed by means of legislation to finish off this triune aspect of her existence, this triune aspect of her living existence, the aspects of her lifestyle, ritual praxis, and her high art. And they got to that by 1930, and they finally overthrew her in the act of destruction of 1947. So that was the brief thing, the brief set of aspects that I wanted to consider in this short video. It's an experimental one. I just wanted to see how it would go. And thank you very much for attending to it.